We have studied some interesting scriptures in the last few days when we're talking about dealing with the carnal man. And in the book of Romans, we find that the Apostle Paul tells us that this is a battle that plays out in the mind of humans. Because the truth is that God has given us His law, or He's given us His understanding. But yet there is this conflict. And of course, all of the passions of one's own self very much cries out. And we find ourselves following our passions rather than our quest for spiritual things. James tells us in his book, he says, if a person says that I am tempted of God, he says that's not correct, because God does not tempt us. But he does tell us that temptation is a product of following after what is in our heart. And this goes back to what we talked about on Monday, about that God gave us this will. In other words, we have the ability to accept God or to reject God, to follow God's heart and His passion and His Spirit, or we have the ability to reject all of that. But going back to this thing about the mind, and remember we read in Romans chapter 12 where he tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. To bring our mind and our thought life into subjection. Now listen to this. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. So James is telling us that this following after the lust, it's already in our heart because it's a part of the will. But following that to its conclusion, in other words, we are enticed, we are intrigued. I've used the expression before, you're just minding your own business. You're not doing anything to be seeking after sin, but something just appears. And all of a sudden you have an image, or you have something that you did not plan. It's just there. The question is how do you react to that? Do you turn away, or do you reject it, or do you begin to entertain it? And this is what James is telling us about being enticed. He said you become enticed, and then when lust has conceived, in other words, it's taken its process, it bringeth forth sin. And of course, the wages of sin, the scripture tells us, is death. And so he said when it's finished, it's death. In other words, it's a process in our own mind that we have to go through to determine whether we choose to do right or whether we choose to do wrong, and whether we choose to lean into our spiritual person or allow our carnal man to dictate. I've said this so many times. Life is just full of choices. It's Pastor Jack King with the gospel on the radio broadcast.